Welcome back, Night Wanderer. Go ahead, dim the lights, grab a blanket, and let's take another slow walk through the cobwebbed corridors of history. Tonight's story isn't about knights or kings, or even the endless wars they started because someone looked at them funny. No, tonight we're going somewhere quieter, darker, but softly so. We're visiting the Middle Ages, the time when people thought cats were witches, bathing was suspicious, and your death could be predicted by, well, pretty much anything. Because back then, medicine was guesswork, superstition was science, and dying young was just normal. And since no one could really prevent death, people decided they might as well see it coming. So they invented a whole catalog of charmingly grim ways to predict it. From prophetic dreams to the way your candle burned, nothing escaped the medieval eye for doom. So let's float gently into the flickering candlelight of the 14th century, where everyone smelled like wet hay and mortality was the neighborhood gossip. Let's start with something nice and classic, the death candle. Imagine this. You're sitting in a small, smoky cottage. Someone is sick in bed, wheezing, pale, surrounded by family, and a priest who's already practicing his Latin. On the bedside table burns a single candle, and everyone's watching it like it's a medieval TV show, because this candle supposedly knows if the person will make it through the night. If the flame burned high and steady, that was good. The soul might hang on. But if it flickered, hissed, or split into two flames, congratulations. You just got the early death spoiler. Some people even said the candle would lean toward the dying person, as if eager to collect the soul. Of course, candles back then were made from animal fat, random wicks, and bad lighting conditions, so they were always flickering, which means, statistically speaking, the death candle was right a lot of the time. Now, maybe you're thinking, candles are boring. Let's move on to something a bit more personal, like the death knock. This one's simple. If you heard 3 knocks on your door and no one was there, it meant death was politely announcing your reservation. Kind of like a spectral Amazon delivery, but for your soul. Some said the knocks came from spirits. Others said they were omens of the body. Apparently, if you heard the knocking inside your head, it was a sign your own time was coming. Medieval people had a lot of free time and not many hobbies. So naturally, they spent much of it waiting for mysterious knocks that could seal their fate. There are records from old church diaries and local folklore of entire villages panicking over these sounds. Spoiler: most of them were probably rats, or wind, or, the sound of your own heartbeat echoing in a drafty hut. Still, the idea stuck, because the Middle Ages were all about finding meaning in small, spooky things. But maybe you didn't trust candles or knocks. Maybe you preferred something more biological. That's where corpse medicine meets death diagnosis. Doctors, and I use that word very loosely, believed the body itself could warn you when death was near. If your eyes grew dull, your ears rang, or you started smelling something earthly, it was a sure sign your body was preparing to check out. The death smell was a real obsession. Medieval physicians described it as a kind of rotting sweetness, which, if you think about it too long, is not ideal bedtime imagery. Sorry about that. Sometimes monks even wrote in journals that patients smelled of the grave days before they died, which could have something to do with the fact that hygiene in the 1300s was non-existent. Let's drift over to something more symbolic, the death dream. Dreams were serious business back then. People believed that when you slept, your soul went wandering around, gossiping with angels, demons, or your dead relatives. And occasionally one of them would whisper, "By the way, Tuesday's your last day." If you dreamed of water rising, or of your teeth falling out, or of a black-robed figure watching from a distance, it was considered an omen, a gentle, subconscious RSVP to the afterlife. The tooth dream one was especially popular. Losing teeth meant losing vitality, so people thought it symbolized life slipping away. Ironically, by the time most medieval people were 30, they'd already lost half their teeth. So technically, everyone was a walking prophecy. Now, if you were wealthy, say, a noble or minor royal, you could afford the premium version of death prediction. Professional fortune tellers. These folks had all sorts of methods. They read the stars, the shape of your skull, the lines on your palm, even how your urine looked under candlelight. If it shimmered the wrong way, it meant your days were numbered. If it bubbled oddly, that was a sign of corruption within. One 15th century physician, Paracelsus, actually wrote that urine could speak the truth of the body, which sounds poetic until you realize he meant it literally. People genuinely stared into little pots of pee trying to glimpse their destiny. Now, this wouldn't be a proper medieval tale without the church getting involved, and yes, they had their own death indicators. According to certain monastic traditions, saints could sense approaching death, not their own, other people's. There are records of monks suddenly bursting into tears at dinner and saying, "Brother Thomas will die before dawn." And of course, Brother Thomas usually did, which sounds eerie, but consider this. Monasteries were small, close communities, and most prophecies came after someone had been coughing for weeks. It was less mysticism, more obvious pattern recognition. Still, the legend of saintly foresight was comforting. It made death feel orderly, preordained, like a divine schedule, not just random suffering. Let's float now toward something truly medieval. The Death Watch beetle. Yes, an insect. If you lived in an old wooden house and heard a faint ticking sound in the beams, people said it was the death beetle, counting down to someone's demise. In reality, it was just a beetle tapping to attract a mate. But you try explaining entomology to someone in 1362 who's watching their roof decay and their cousin die of plague. The beetle sound became a kind of death metronome. Writers later used it as a Gothic symbol of doom. Even Edgar Allan Poe couldn't resist. Back then, though, if you heard that ticking at night, you might just blow out your candle and start preparing your will. Of course, predicting death wasn't only about observation. Sometimes people tried to test fate. In rural areas, there was a practice called measuring the shroud. Basically, you'd take a length of linen and measure someone's height. Purely out of curiosity, supposedly. But if the fabric turned out to be shorter than expected, that meant the person was destined to fit the cloth soon. In other words, you just measured their future burial shroud. There are even accounts of families doing this to newborns, as a kind of folk ritual to ward off death, by confronting it early, which feels a bit like trying to avoid bad luck by walking directly under a ladder. And then there were the animals. Oh yes, medieval pets had psychic reputations. If a dog howled at night facing a certain window, that meant death was coming for someone inside. Cats, naturally, were considered more witchy than prophetic. But an owl landing on your roof? That was the medieval equivalent of getting a text from the Grim Reaper. Some believed cows could sense death too. They'd stop giving milk or stare blankly toward the house of the doomed, which probably just meant they were cows being cows. But again, people needed something to explain the chaos. By now, you might be wondering, why did medieval people obsess over predicting death so much? Well, because they had to. Death was everywhere. Plague, famine, childbirth, war, infection from a paper cut. You name it. The average person's lifespan hovered around 35. Life was short, brutal, and confusing. So these omens gave them a sense of structure, a way to pretend there was meaning behind the randomness. If death could be predicted, maybe it could be prepared for, or even delayed. Many people kept small charms, wore herbs, or whispered prayers at bedtime, just in case. Some nobles even paid priests to watch them for signs of approaching death, like medieval life coaches, but gloomier, and maybe in a strange way. That's the most human thing about all of it. Predicting death wasn't really about fear. It was about comfort. About pretending the unknowable could be tamed by a flickering candle, a knock on the wall, or a whisper in a dream. So, as you drift off tonight, if you hear a soft creak or see your candle dance, don't worry. It's probably nothing. Probably. Let's float onward next time to the people who took things even further, the ones who tried to talk to the dead for advice. Because apparently, in the Middle Ages, silence wasn't an option.